Greeting, my friends. Tyler here, and I am going to be skimming through some articles and other documents about some issues that I think people need to pay more attention about, and it has to do with bank accounts being frozen. There's a number of different reasons. We're going to just discuss on a few and hopefully talked about some solutions and introduce you to some true solutions. I found an article here. Law lets IRS seize accounts on suspicion. No crime required. And it says Carol Hinders at her modest cash-only Mexican restaurant in so-and-so, Iowa. Last year, tax agents seized her funds. And it goes on to say, for almost 40 years, Caroline so-and-so has dished out Mexican specialties at her modest cash-only restaurant. For just as long, she deposited the earnings at a small bank branch nearby until last year when two tax agents knocked on her door informing her that they had seized her checking account almost $33,000. Now, the IRS did not accuse her of money laundering or cheating on her taxes. In fact, she had not been charged with any crime. Instead, the money was seized only because she had deposited less than $10,000 at a time, which they viewed as an attempt to avoid triggering a required government report. So, as many of you know, when you do a deposit, excuse me, or do any transfer $10,000 or more, there is some Treasury form you're supposed to fill out and notify the Treasury. And so, many times people withdraw less than $10,000 at a time or deposit less than $10,000 at a time, or if they're sending money to themselves to another account or to a friend or to a business partner to pay for something, sometimes people chop it up into less than $10,000. And so this law, which was designed to catch money launderers, drug traffickers, and racketeers and terrorists, is being used against run-of-the-mill small business owners and wage earners who have not committed any crime. And basically what they do is they seize or freeze the accounts, and then the business owner is forced to hire attorneys and do litigation to try to go into courts. And obviously it could take a year, 2 years, 3 years to prove your innocence. With the IRS, you're guilty till proven innocent. And so obviously what a lot of the companies do is they wind up negotiating and cutting deals, and the IRS unfreezes or returns about half the money and keeps about half the money, and everybody involved gets a nice healthy commission. And obviously it's a shame. So there's lots of other articles online. You can type in a Google search and you can see lots of legitimate businesses that are being screwed over by this. But again, this is just one of the many ways that people's bank accounts can be frozen. We have another article here on IRS seizes life savings for deposits under $10,000. Money confiscated even though no crime committed. So people's life savings. Let's see. An Iowa woman who did not cheat on her. Is this the same? Yeah, this is an article talking about the same woman, the $33,000. But there's many articles covering several different types of cases. Here's one. The government seized $447,000 from a business, a cash-intensive candy and cigarette distributor that has been run by one family for 27 years. In one Long Island, New York case, the police submitted almost a year's worth of daily deposits by businesses ranging from $5,550 to $9,910. The officer wrote in his warrant affidavit that based on his training and experience, the pattern is consistent with structuring. Under the Bank Secrecy Act, banks and other financial institutions must report cash deposits greater than $10,000. But since many criminals are aware of that requirement, banks also are supposed to report any suspicious transactions, including deposit patterns below $10,000 the times reported. Critics say a law enforcement dragnet has now been cheated with more than 100 multi-agency task forces scouring bank reports just looking for accounts to seize. Last year, banks filed more than... hang on a second. Last year, banks filed more than 700,000 suspicious activity reports. Owners who are caught up in structuring cases often cannot afford to fight. Median amount seized by the IRS was $34,000 according to the Institute for Justice Analysis, while legal costs can easily mount to $20,000 or more. Definition of structure, use the phrase structuring. Structure, construct or arrange according to a plan given a pattern or organization to. So to arrange a plan to avoid certain deposit amounts, which would require certain notifications to be sent. 31 USC 532 subsection 5324 is structuring transactions to evade reporting requirement prohibited. So you can read the United States Code under Title 31 of the United States Code, subsection 5324, and when you type that in, you usually get this Cornell University Law School website, law.cornell.edu, and you can read the U.S. Code and where you can find it. Now, let me see. So, what are the solutions to this? And there's a lot of other reasons why people can have their bank accounts frozen. You could legitimately owe taxes to the IRS or to the state, or for, alimony, child support. There could be a lawsuit. There could even be a lawsuit that you were never given notice of, and there's a judgment against you, and your account is frozen. There's lots of things that are a problem. And so, what's the solution? The solution is to get away from using their system that they can freeze and control. One of the definitions of sovereignty is the ability to earn, keep, acquire, and grow your own wealth and your own savings and your own assets and your own property and your own monetary resources and your own funds and your own credit and your own capital without, legally, right, without any threats of, seizure by surprise, seizure by the fact that they have control over your account, seizure by force, seizure by gunpoint, seizure by threats, duress, coercion, or intimidation. Right? So just to summarize that, the ability to make money and keep it without somebody else having the authority to take it from you without your consent. So by keeping money in a bank account in the US, you are not sovereign. Okay? And even, trust accounts and different things like this, all that's doing is just kind of getting the money out of your straw man name per se, to an extent, but those accounts, the same thing can happen to them. Or if the $10,000, that they're freezing the accounts, the articles that we just spoke about, it doesn't matter if you open up a trust account or a corporation or an LLC account or different things. It doesn't matter. If you're operating through the account and you have these habits that spark these suspicious activity reports, then obviously you may be subject to similar situations from happening. Okay, and obviously all those corporations and trusts still have taxing requirements as well. And so, unless you, and even if you do file and pay your taxes or whatever, there could be an audit, there could be something that happens. There's a lot of different situations that they could just surprise freeze your account. The bottom line is You do not live in a world here in the U.S., the good old U.S. of A., where you can securely go to bed at night, look at your bank statements, look at your bank account, and then absolutely know for sure that there's no chance of it being frozen when you wake up in the morning. So obviously, one of the solutions that you can do right away is, if you do have all your money in your banks, go to the bank and take out a lot of money from your bank and hold on to it and protect it for safekeeping. But a lot of people don't want to keep cash lying around their house. They have kids. That you have your kids. You have friends that come over. You don't know when you're not home, when you're working, and you don't want to hide all this cash in your house. It could be stolen. It could be burglarized. You could have a lot of different situations. Obviously, people can keep safes. Obviously, there's lots of things that common sense things that many of you probably already do. Everybody pretty much keeps some cash on them and tries to protect it for emergencies and doesn't keep it all in the bank. But you can only hold on to so much, right? You can't keep you can't keep hundreds of thousands of dollars in your home or your apartment. I mean, it's just unrealistic and dangerous. So but it's also dangerous to keep your money in the bank. So what's the solution for all this, right? What is the solution for all this? If those are the two options, keeping some money at home and some money in the bank, so that there's a diversification of your risk. If your bank account gets frozen, at least you have some money on you at home. If your home gets burglarized or someone steals it, at least you have some money in your bank. It's very unlikely that you're going to have two catastrophes that happen at the same time, where your bank account gets frozen and your house gets burglarized, and they steal all your money at the same time, right? That's not very likely. So that's a place to start. But what are the real solutions? What are the real ways to be sovereign with your assets, with your money, and with your funds? And so we will cover, and in other conversations, we will cover some of the cryptocurrency solutions like Bitcoin and some of the other cryptocurrency solutions. In fact, I plan on doing a webinar shortly here. I've been collecting some slides for it. This will be part of the status correction course / empower yourself pack material. Okay, but it's going to be very detailed and tell people a lot has changed with Bitcoin in a year or in 2 years, so you have to stay on top of it. So I can stay on top of it for you and show you where to go and what you need to be aware of, and what are the safest ways to keeping and using cryptocurrencies. I'm going to cover all this. What are the advantages? I guess I could just touch on a couple of the advantages right now. The government or creditors do not have the capacity to freeze or seize Bitcoin accounts by surprise. Okay, it's possible that after a lawsuit, right, after investigation, and then after a civil or criminal lawsuit, that the defendant can be ordered by the court to turn over the logins and passwords for their Bitcoin account that they're in control of, but it won't happen by surprise. Okay, when the bank accounts with the Federal Reserve System in the U.S. can be frozen by surprise. So that's a major level of protection, and you'll know when they're coming after you. You'll know when you have plenty of time to get the heads up on anyone trying to seize your Bitcoin accounts, and at that point you have the right to defend yourself, and so it's not a sure thing that they would win, and you have the right to defend yourself. And if you are innocent, you do defend yourself, and you know the law, and you stand on your argument and your position, then you will win, and nobody will get access to your money, unless of course you're guilty as heck. So that is one. Now there's a lot of privacy. It's very hard for people to find out that you even have a Bitcoin account if you don't flaunt it around and You can have several Bitcoin accounts. So there's lots of different advantages to that. The transaction fees are very, very, very low. You can transfer money from a bank account or credit card or whatever to actually from any currency in the world. You can go to any cryptocurrency, to any fiat currency, and vice versa pretty easily once you know and create an account with the right exchangers online. Okay, so there's a lot of advantages to using Bitcoin. It's transferred in a second. There's no delay. There's no multi-day. When you do a wire transfer, there's no crazy fees. There's no delay. There's no reversals. If you accept a payment from a customer on credit card or whatever, there's a possibility that there could be a reversal. There's no reversals with Bitcoin, so you don't have to worry about that. There's a lot of advantages. We're not going to do a recording on Bitcoin right now. We're just kind of getting the conversation started. Banking offshore is another major solution. Okay, so we're going to cover that. Another, in the same conversation, another concern is just the issues with the insolvency and the limited money that the banks actually have. So, the banks are indebted to you, the depositors. But if everybody goes to the bank to get their currency out in Federal Reserve notes, there's not enough money to go around. Okay, and so a lot of people know that the banks keep less than 10% actual bills that they can withdraw at the desk or at the ATM, and so there's a lot of problems. I just want to read this article. This will cover a lot of my other concerns and some solutions. Okay, so some things to be concerned about keeping money in the bank, and what's wrong with, or what's some of the concerns, serious concerns about contracting with the Federal Reserve banking system, financial institutions, which are all adhesion contracts and are all part of the all financial institutions, Federal Reserve Bank financial institutions in the U.S. are quasi-governmental agencies. They're not necessarily private companies. They're all government agencies because they're all Federal Reserve Bank chartered. They're like Federal Reserve Bank subsidiaries, and they're FDIC insured. And so if you have a bank account in the U.S., you're basically contracting with the United States corporation. So a lot of you that want to be sovereign are waiving and giving up your sovereignty even by just having a bank account. And this is why when people go to court and they're telling the judge, I am sovereign, I am this, I am whatever, what does the judge always do? I've seen this in real life. I've seen people go to court and do this. And I've heard other cases about this happening also. The judges say, oh, okay, you think you're sovereign? Okay, how did you get here? Did you use United States money to, pay to get here? Did you use this stuff? Or are you operating in gold or silver with your own private currency? Do you have a bank account? Do you have a driver's license? Do you, vote in elections? These different things like this. I think the most common ones are, do you have a bank account? And the judge can find out. Judge can find out very easily. Look up on the computer and be like, well, Mr. Smith, you have a bank account at Chase Bank, so you think that you're sovereign? Okay, so they do these things, and you have to know the counter argument in order to rebut that presumption that that has waived your sovereign immunity if you have one. Now, there might be a defense to that, there might not be a defense to that. That's not the purpose of this conversation right now. And also, the use of Federal Reserve notes, I mean, it's a very easy, there's something in the UCC called the law of necessity, and you can look that up. And that's why we file UCCs, because according to the law of necessity, it basically is a maxim that says that although this might give the illusion, because we're using their form, so it might give the illusion that we're submitting to their authority by using their form to fill this out and file this or record this, as long as we express on the document that we're not waiving our sovereignty just by filling out their form, then that protects us. But the reason why we're doing it is just to state a claim in their system, because there's all these parties out there that are going to trespass if we don't record a UCC in the officially in the commercial registry. So that's why filing UCCs, there's all these people that in the last couple of years, all these other, quite frankly, my competitors who have their own websites and conference calls and different things that are out there. A lot of people are saying, oh, you need to do a non-UCC filing. You need to do a UCC, but check off non-UCC filing. And the reason why they say that, I believe, is because they're trying to not make it a UCC recording in the commercial registry due to this issue. But I disagree, and the record of successes with the proper SPC/UCC filing process is, speaks for itself. Okay, but look up the law of necessity UCC, and there's a strong defense about the use of Federal Reserve notes that falls under the law of necessity as well. But you have to state it. If the judge says, well, you're not sovereign because you're using Federal Reserve notes, you're using United States currency, so therefore you're subjecting yourself to our authority and our jurisdiction. Well, if you remain silent and you don't say, well, I object because of this, that, and the other thing, then he won the argument. Okay? So you need to know your stuff and rebut that, and if you forget, you can always make a notice of correction of the record, file it into the case, and type up, hey, when the judge said this, I forgot to say something, or I said the wrong thing, and I want to just correct the record. This is my official formal response to that, and my official formal rebuttal to that. Just wanted to correct the record. Sincerely, your name. And just file that with the case, right? So, it's not like if you just came back from court and you didn't rebut something that you can't fix it, but you should know some of these things that they're going to say. Okay, so hold on. UCC law of necessity. I know we're going off a little tangent here, but other goals of the UCC were to modernize contract law and to allow for exceptions from the common law in contracts between merchants. We got a good article here. Oh, this is going to be kind of long. Let's see. Do a search for law of necessity. Kind of like, let me see, contractually being a victim of those acting on the alleged authority granted by the law of necessity, no lawful object, valuable consideration, free consent of all parties involved, absence of fraud, duress, malice, and undue influence, no bona fide enforceable contract, no valid enforceable nexus, absolute right to engage in any action of any kind in self-defense, complete and total right to disregard any alleged jurisdiction demands from self-admitted outlaws commit naked criminal aggression without any credibility, and right to demand allegiance and compliance from anyone. Yeah, okay. So, these are some notes that you can take. Anyways, I want to get back on the subject matter where I was going with this recording here. I want to get into this article and kind of jump into the thing that I wanted to discuss. And there's a lot of issues. The banking, your SPC trust. When you set your SPC trust is the one contracting with the U.S. and with the Federal Reserve to have this bank account, and that would be your defense to that. But if you have an old bank account that you set up directly with the Social Security number and the U.S. citizen, then you don't really have a good argument. You don't really have a good reason why you did that. If you're going to remain sovereign, you need to close down the bank account, the personal bank account that you set up, and go back and open up your trust account or your corporation's account. And therefore, it's the corporation and it's the trust that is contracting, and you're not the one that's directly contracting, because when you contract with them, then there is strong implications and implications that you're waiving your rights and so on and so forth. So, I got this article here. So, anyways, though, my point, though, is that it's not the greatest idea to have these bank accounts with the Federal Reserve System. Anyway, there's way better options, and it's not just about sovereignty and jurisdiction. It's about protecting your life savings, protecting, making more money from the savings accounts. And we're going to do a whole visual explaining and showing you how you can grow your wealth and grow a small amount of savings into a larger amount from using offshore savings accounts, where you get paid a lot more than 0.9% interest rates like U.S. savings accounts. There are actually many bank accounts overseas where you can get between 15 and 30 something percent interest rates. So, really, with the right strategy, mitigating for the right calculated risks, there's a plan where for just having $100,000 or $200,000 to plop in a savings account and not touch, you can basically grow that and create a monthly income for yourself where you never have to work again. So, or you could, grow it up eventually to, compounded interest eventually to millions of dollars if you want to. So, those are some strategies and some things, mostly for the inner circle people. And so we have something called the inner circle, and in another audio coming out shortly hereafter, I will be announcing the introduction of the inner circle, but is basically people that are financially savvy. And the inner circle is really mostly for people, they don't have a lot of chaos going on in their life right now. They don't have a lot of chaotic court cases or court battles or major distractions, right? And so it might be okay if you do have a court case, but it's for people that have handled a lot of those problems in their life and are looking to grow and go forward now. People that are looking to go on the offense, right? People that are done, they're not focusing all their time on. Now, listen, when you're on the attack, you gotta play defense, right? If you're being attacked and your back's up against the wall, you got to handle your defensive approach. But if you can handle the offensive approach, if your space is cleared in your life where you can handle the offensive approach, and you would like to get wealthy and you would like to get rich, it's not going to be overnight, but over the course of 10, 20 years or something like that. If you're looking to get rich and you're looking to grow whatever assets or savings that you have, then the inner circle membership might be for you. It's not for people who have a net worth of anything less than, at least 5 figures. So if you don't have that if you don't have at least $10,000 set aside, at all times, for the last, I don't know, 6 or 12 months. And I'm just talking about a minimum. It's really, the inner circle is supposed to be for people who have $100,000 net worth up, right? But if you have the time and space and you're really sharp and you've already gone through our status correction course and you've already gone through our SPC done for you, and maybe you're younger and you haven't saved up $100,000 yet, but you've saved up and you have 10, 20, 30, $40,000. Yeah, the point is that you need to have something to play with, because a lot of these strategies we talk about in the inner circle are not going to mean anything to people that have $1,000 in their bank account, and that's it. It's really not going to be useful for you right now. If that's your situation, at this point, then you need to focus on starting a business and making more money, or a variety of different tax savings strategies. Even if you're a wage earner, even if you are if you're a secured party creditor and you're a wage earner, you can still have many tax savings by learning how to operate your SPC trust and write off as many business deductions and expenses, and then lowering your tax burden for the trust in comparison to the taxes that were being withheld and taken out of your paycheck, the last several years. So that's a place to start for people that don't have a lot of savings. And I know it's difficult when they garnish and take 7 taxes out of your paycheck every pay period. So the SPC is a way to do that. They don't withhold taxes from your paycheck when you become an SPC and you switch your W-4. Of course, if you one of our clients, maybe you've gotten the process and you've already done that, and you are starting to put more money in your pocket. But just make sure that your trust may owe some taxes at the end of the year. Probably not going to be anywhere near as much, because a trust has a lot of deductions, but you need to get with your own proper accountant and tax professional and determine what you want to do. A great book, I highly recommend that you be as informed as possible, but a great book is Accounting for Dummies. You can get it at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, wherever. And there's also an accounting course on pennfoster.edu. I think it's for like $1,000. You could take an accounting online course and get a degree for $1,000, without having to enroll in college and all this stuff. And that is pennfoster.edu. I think it's the largest online college course company that there is. They have very affordable programs, beginner level, basics. But that's a wonderful place to start, is the basics. Most people skip over the basics, and unless you learn the foundation about any topic and learn the basics, how successful would you be in life right now if you didn't know mathematics, right? If you didn't know numbers. If you didn't know the numbers, don't teach mathematics, and definitely don't teach geometry or calculus. So anyways, where was I going with that? All right, so yeah, in the inner circle, we're going to talk about offshore savings accounts, 20+% interest. The visuals on this is just, it's going to astonish you. It's a clear, concise, I think a terrific plan. You have to make your own decisions, of course, and assess your own risks. But we'll be talking about this on the conference calls. There are some possible risks. I think I have ways to mitigate and diminish and almost eliminate completely those risks. But for someone that's got $100,000 that they don't need to touch, and they can just plop it in a savings account. Isn't one of the sayings go, don't the rich people say they make their money make money for them, right? Poor people, there's a saying, poor people work for money, rich people have their money work for them, right? We've all heard this. So my question to you is, why aren't you doing it? If you've got $100,000, in a savings account. Or if you've got the equity in your house, if you own your house free and clear, or you have almost paid off your mortgage, okay, take out another mortgage, pull out $200,000-$300,000 of equity from your house, plop it in your trust account, so you don't immediately automatically, irrevocably owe a large portion of that in taxes. Deposit into your trust account, and then you can write off any investments as a expense, right? As a bit, if the purpose of the business is to make money and you need to make an investment, you need to buy something, you need to invest something, then it's not income yet. So oh man, I can't wait to put these visuals together and just go through all these PowerPoint presentations. It just takes a tremendous amount of work, and I'm still working on it, but I'm just giving you guys a little overview, and you guys can kind of get your mental framework started already. But I was going to show you. You know what? I'm going to save it for the actual presentation, so I don't want to get too off topic here. But there was a whole bunch of different bank accounts that you can open up overseas, and you don't need to leave to go to those countries, but you can if you want to. It's still totally worth it. And just with $100,000 in savings, at the interest rates, I mean, you can earn $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year by doing nothing, just by putting $100,000 or $200,000 in the right bank account. We will talk about that more in the Inner Circle. Now, if you think you're a candidate for the Inner Circle, please contact us. There is a membership fee required, because we require that people actually have a net worth and have some savings. Otherwise, you're not going to get any benefit to the Inner Circle, and you're not going to be of value to the Inner Circle as well. There's some investment opportunities. There's some business partnership opportunities where you can invest in different sister projects that myself and other UCL associates are involved in. Everybody needs to invest in it, either with their time or with their money, or probably both. But it's a collaborative effort. There's amazing business plans, amazing ways to really skyrocket your energy and really create more wealth. So we'll be talking about that, and you might be hearing from that soon. I will be doing a roll call to get any people to participate that feel like they're a candidate. It's for people that have some money, but they're really trying to focus on making more money, and they don't have a lot of distractions with 2 or 3 2 criminal cases and 3 civil cases going at the same time. The IRS after them. I mean, that is not. You don't have the time to deal with this right now. Get rid of those issues first, and then look into something like this, whether it's my Inner Circle, whether it's someone else's, program for wealth creation. Get your shit cleared up first, is my recommendation. So if you feel you're a candidate, then send us an email, reach out to us. I will be having a sign up. I will be having another recording talking about it soon, so just stay on my email list. If we don't respond to your email right away, just, we're saving your email and we will get back to you. And this is not the official roll call for the Inner Circle, but once it starts, we're going to be doing regular conference calls or webinars, and I'm going to be presenting a lot of different opportunities. There's several different class action, common law, claim lawsuits that you can participate in, or invite other people to participate in which the payout upon a successful lawsuit will be very handsome, very large, and these are things that we already have done before. Some of the things, we're combining things that we've done before, but they've never been combined before. So, every opportunity, you have to hear it and decide if you want to participate in it based on your own calculated risk, and you take, you take full responsibility for if you invest time or you invest money into a project that doesn't work out for you for whatever reason. You need to be the only people that can join Inner Circle are the people that are responsible to make their own decisions. We don't tell you to do anything. We don't tell you to you should, take all your life savings and put it here. Okay, that would be irresponsible. You have to be have your own level of life experience and wisdom. Hopefully you've been scammed before, like I have many times, okay? And so you know what to look out for. If you haven't, that's fine too. But just hopefully you should have a good judge of what feels right to you and what makes sense to you, and having done your diligence and different things like this. So if you're a little bit inexperienced, maybe it's not the best, and especially if you don't have a lot of money. But if you have a lot of money and you're willing to take a small portion of it to take a calculated risk, then that's fine. And if you have a older friend or family member, your father, or someone as a mentor, if you are younger, right, that can or if it's a husband, wife, spouse situation, you make financial decisions together, talk to us about that, because I definitely welcome that, because there's going to be a lot of things on the table, and you need to make your own decisions. But there will be, I'm counting about 6 different opportunities now, and they're all, any one of them that you participate in, that you see through to the end, is potentially a home run grand slam compared to any other investment opportunity or business opportunity that I'm involved with. I don't pick subpar, moderate, opportunities. I pick the best opportunities that I can come up with in my brain, right? Or that have been introduced to me, or that I combine this idea and this idea. So, and obviously another thing is, the Inner Circle is really, for people that have been listening to my audios and have been listening to me, and I've gotten a lot of value from me, and people that really trust me and feel that I have a lot of good ideas. I may not know everything, but if you feel like that I am on somewhat of a leading edge path with some of the ideas and some of the common sense things that I mentioned, and some of the people that respect me because I'm very conservative without taking a lot of risks. I always say, hey, if you're gonna file that paperwork and there's a potential it can get you into more trouble than it's worth, then don't do it. I am always the one that says that. Meanwhile, you got all these other websites saying to file 1099s and get all this money back and do this and do that and file bonds and all these different things out there, and I tell people stay away from it. Writing checks on closed checking accounts, EFTs, all these different things. I tell people stay away from it, because I see what gets people into trouble, and it's not worth it. And we just have a sense now, for a spidey sense of, a sixth sense of all the different things that are going on out there, that if a new one pops up tomorrow, I think that I can be a good judge of character, of assessing it and checking with my gut and saying, you know what, I wouldn't really go with that. It sounds like people are going to get into trouble, or it sounds like it's not going to work, based on all the different things that I've seen in 5-6+ years, and getting hundreds of website visitors, hundreds of calls and emails every single week for that long. I can really have a good sense of what's going on. So that's the Inner Circle. Let us know if you're interested. Be prepared to pay a membership fee. All those things will be announced soon, but it's not for everybody, based on the situation you are in your life right now. It's going to be a small, intimate group, so that everybody, I can get to know everybody really well. People have constant, access to me on a daily basis if they need to. It's going to be, very, very accessible. So. Without further ado, we have this banking, and this is kind of be some of the Inner Circle, one of the Inner Circle, breakout projects will have to do with, offshore investing as well. Okay, and that is tremendous wealth creation, or wealth growing opportunity for. Whatever sort. You need to have some money, but then, if you want to turn $100,000 into $1 million, let's say, something like that, and then go up from there, wonderful, 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 wonderful opportunity, and I will explain with some visuals and stuff that I'm sure will impress you. Okay, so why you should consider an offshore bank account. The uncomfortable truth is that most banking systems in the West are highly illiquid and borderline insolvent. I'm not saying this to shock you. This is a fact based on publicly available financial statements. In the current system, when you deposit money in your bank, the bank takes the vast majority of that money and lends it out or invests it in other financial instruments. It keeps only a small fraction of your money on reserve in case you ever need to make a withdrawal or transfer money out of the bank. In fact, many banks maintain balances that are as little as 1 to 2% of their customer deposits, which is a minuscule margin of safety in case of a financial shock. Most people don't think this is a problem because the central bank or the government or the FDIC can just bail the banks out. But today, the largest, most vital central banks in the world are in precarious position themselves, and they don't have the level of capital necessary to save the financial system. Just look at Section 5 of the U.S. Federal Reserve's H.4.1 report, published every Thursday, and you can see just how pitifully capitalized the world's largest central bank is. At the time of this writing, the Federal Reserve holds around $40 billion in capital, calculated as the Fed's total assets minus its total liabilities. It's like calculating someone's net worth. You add up the cash, the house, the car, etc., and then subtract the mortgage and the credit card debt. Naturally, the higher the Fed's net worth, the better. Now, a net worth or equity of $40 billion may sound like a lot, but when you compare that with the $4.5 trillion the Fed has in total assets, $40 billion is nothing. In fact, as a percentage, it's a capital reserve at a razor-thin level of 0.88%. This means that if the Fed's assets decline in value by just 0.88%, then the largest central bank in the world would become insolvent. That's essentially what happened to Lehman Brothers and numerous other banks in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. Now, what does it actually mean if a central bank becomes insolvent? Can it even happen? When an entity becomes insolvent, all of its liabilities, its debts, drastically lose value since it becomes unable to honor them. What are the liabilities of a central bank? Look into your wallet. The green pieces of paper that we call US dollars are liabilities of the Fed. It even says Federal Reserve note on them. In case the Federal Reserve becomes insolvent, the currency it issues would lose its value. Can this even happen? Well, sure it can. There are numerous examples, even in recent history, when central banks themselves went bust. Remember the spectacle hyperinflation in Zimbabwe a few years ago? Or the more recent crisis that wiped out the financial system in Iceland, from which the country and its currency are still recovering? But can't the government just step in and save the central bank if that were to happen? No, because the U.S. government is also insolvent. The U.S. Government Accountability Office's financial statements plainly state that the U.S. government's net financial position is negative $17 trillion. It's right there on page 48. And if you include the long-term liabilities, the number is as bad as negative $40 trillion. Then there's the FDIC, which insures deposits in the U.S. banking system. Its 2014 annual report, the FDIC itself points out its whole insurance fund constitutes just a fraction of a percent of all the deposits in the system, and that its reserve ratio is just 1.01%. With a reserve so low, the FDIC not only lacks any meaningful teeth to insure the system, but it actually fails to meet the minimum level that is required by law. This means that the FDIC's finances are actually worse off than the banks it's supposed to insure. Curiously, the FDIC's reserves today are actually far lower than they were in the prior to the last financial crisis. On top of that, back then the FDIC only insured $100,000 worth of your deposits per financial institution. Now it's $250,000. So essentially, the FDIC is on the hook to pay more than twice as much money to depositors, yet it has a lower reserve to support an even larger banking system than before. When the banks, their insurers, and the government that backs them are all so close to insolvency, you know that this is not a safe place for your savings. If you think the US is in bad shape, then take a look at Europe and Japan. Most of the major countries in Europe have amassed significant liabilities, with some having debts that amount to well over 100% of their GDP. Then there's Japan, where the government's financial situation is so bad that they spend 43% of tax revenue just to pay interest on their prodigious debt. 43%. This is serious. It's entirely unsustainable, and it means that the government is in no position to support its banking system. The thing is, though, very few people actually bother to look at the bank's financial statements. We're all made to believe that banks are inherently safe. They operate in grand buildings and come with government guarantees, so few people give any thought to putting their savings in the custody of these institutions. But, as I've already explained, those guarantees aren't worth the paper that they're printed on, and those grand buildings are nothing but window dressing. Even after seeing firsthand how many banks failed back in 2008 and knowing fully well how deeply indebted their governments are, barely anyone acknowledges the obvious risks. Most people think everything will be alright simply because everyone else believes the same thing, but this is an extremely dangerous assumption to make. Don't forget about Cyprus. It's the same foolish assumption that the people of Cyprus made back in 2013. For years, Cypriot banks were illiquid and insolvent for years, and the data showing the vulnerability of the financial system was out there in the public, available for anyone who cared to look. Heck, the government itself admitted a few months before the final straw broke that the financial system was very risky, would likely require a bailout, and that the government was too broke to save the banks. So on Friday night, March 13th, 2013, which happened to be Friday the 13th, Cypriots went to bed thinking that everything was fine. Many people had probably logged onto their bank's websites that day to check their balances and saw nothing wrong. But then they woke up the next morning to find that the government had closed all the banks and all the accounts were frozen. People found out the hard way that just because they could see an account balance printed on a computer screen didn't mean that their bank actually had the money. The money wasn't there, and eventually the banks could no longer keep up this charade. The situation went from normal to a full-blown crisis literally overnight. This happens more often than you think. Governments have the authority to freeze and confiscate your assets at the drop of a hat. And they can use that authority the moment they decide that either you've done something wrong, whether or not you have, or that they need to, quote, bail in a broken financial system. This is just what we talked about in the beginning. Another reason you may have not even thought about that your accounts can be frozen. Financial crises, not just IRS suspicions or court cases you've had with your knowledge or without your knowledge. But this is another big problem. This is what governments do when they have no other choice. It has happened in the past in the United States, and it has been happening with greater and greater frequency around the world. The conclusion to draw here is very simple. When every shred of objective evidence suggests that every major institution in your home country's banking system is borderline insolvent, does it really make sense to hold 100% of your savings there? No. That's why I advise my family members, close friends, and our readers to consider moving at least a portion of their savings to a strong bank overseas. If something happens, you don't want to be left stranded, unable to access your own money. So it's of extreme importance to diversify your assets across multiple stable jurisdictions. This is one of the most important steps in your journey to create a life where no matter what happens in the world, you will be okay. Benefits of offshore banking. Protection from financial shocks. Okay? One of the number one threats is that your bank is highly illiquid and potentially insolvent. So, as we mentioned before, nothing has actually been fixed since the last financial crisis. In fact, the situation is actually even worse. Bad banks were not allowed to fail, and thus they were ultimately left to keep on doing what they've been doing leading up to the previous crisis. In the meantime, governments and central banks racked up monstrous debts and exhausted every tool they had to keep this broken system afloat. Given these inputs, another financial crisis is very likely. And if you're smart, you'll make sure that your money is in a highly liquid, solvent bank. This means that they actually have the money or they have a lot of the money to pay the depositors if everybody wants to get the money out of the bank, or a portion of the people want to get the money in the bank. This minimizes the chances of your savings simply disappearing. Okay. Number 2, protection from asset seizure. Your assets can be frozen in an instant is another threat to people having certain bank accounts, particularly in the U.S. or wherever. So you may not even know it, but U.S. banks filed 1.6 million suspicious activity reports last year. Chances are that your bank submitted one about you. So I think we said in another article it was like 700,000. In this article it's saying 1.6 million. Even withdrawing or so maybe this went up over the last couple of years. Even withdrawing or transferring a low 5-figure amount can trigger the bank to submit a suspicious activity report, as they are forced to spy on and rat out their customers. Folks, wouldn't it make sense to sign a contract with a bank that doesn't rat you out for, quote, suspicious transfers? If some government agency decides that your financial transactions are potentially linked to illicit activity, they can seize your account with just one click. They don't need to have any proof of actual illicit activity to do so. It is solely up to their discretion. Of course, you can sue them to try to prove your innocence. Excuse me, folks. It's quite early in the morning. The coffee's not completely kicking in yet. I might need another refill. Of course, you can sue them to try to prove your innocence, but with your accounts frozen, what funds do you have to pursue that? Here, having an account overseas in a foreign jurisdiction means that for whatever reason, your home government can't freeze with just a phone call. It's a great way to keep some funds out of their immediate control. Number 3, protection from capital controls. Threat number 3 is if bankrupt governments almost invariably resort to capital controls. Are you willing to bet it all that this time is different? Wow, that was wordy. Are you willing to bet at all that this time is any different? It's widely known how deeply in debt the U.S. government is. And despite what politicians might think, governments cannot keep borrowing and printing forever. Someday their credit will run out. Historically, when people start to sense that things are going south economically in their country, they start moving their money towards exits. It's precisely what's happening in places like Greece and even China, where depositors are pulling billions out of the banking system. I just want to make a little notation here. Despite what politicians might think, governments cannot keep borrowing and printing forever. I just want to say some of the politicians, or some of the candidates, many of them were not politicians, some of the candidates that you should be aware of that are well aware and opposing and will, or at least they've expressed their intention and their will, and talk very strongly about stopping governments continuing to keep borrowing and printing forever. Candidates like Obama and Hillary Clinton and George Bush are part of the status quo of continuing to borrow and print forever, and they're probably part of a system that is on purpose trying to implode the U.S. economy. And there are candidates like Barry Goldwater way back. There are candidates like Ronald Reagan. There are candidates like Ronald Reagan, who was president in 1980 to 88. in the U.S. There were candidates like Ross Perot. Remember Ross Perot, who ran as a third party, and he was actually in the debate as a third party. He was threatened and, kind of pulled out towards the end. He stopped campaigning towards the end because they threatened his life and that of his family. But Ross Perot was the billionaire who could not be bought out by special interests and ran as a third party against, I think it was against Clinton and Dole, or who was that? Bush and Bush, Clinton, and Perot, I think it was. But anyways, look up Ross Perot. He was basically the Donald Trump of his age, only he didn't say offensive things to piss people off, and so people didn't really hate him like they hate Donald Trump for saying, listen, Donald Trump is a New Yorker. In New York, people that grow up in New York, trust me, I know, they they talk very crass. They say things. They use hyperbole. They say extraordinary things, but they really, there's good people. They really care about getting things done. But Ross Perot, I think he was from Texas or, the South, Arkansas, somewhere. Ross Perot was the same thing as Donald Trump. He was a billionaire. He just wanted to stop this crazy system from the U.S. imploding. And the same thing he's saying that Donald Trump was saying. Look what's going on with China, and look what's going on. The U.S. is whatever trillion in debt, and now it's 17, 20, whatever trillion dollars in debt, and this is a crazy situation, and it's not going to last forever, and we're just going to, it's going to be the end of the empire. It's going to be the end of civilization. Look at old empires. Look at, when you remember reading in history class, social studies class, that, how did this civilization in, Byzantine Empire and, Rome, how did Rome collapse? I mean, it doesn't even tell you in the history books. It gives you some suspicions. It's like, oh, well, they didn't have any farmland left, and they overfarmed, and, they had a civil war. How did these empires collapse? It's like a mystery. There's no official, 100% evidence of how they collapsed, but they collapsed at some point, and this civilization will collapse when the U.S. completely implodes. So I don't care how bad Donald Trump has offended whoever. He is the candidate that is truly looking to stop going further into debt and have the U.S. Economy implode and the entire world civilization collapse and be defunct and destroyed. So I just want to put that out there on that. No, he's not perfect, but Hillary Clinton will keep putting us further and further into debt. She's part of the same establishment, and she's still part of the establishment. What are some of the other candidates? Going back, let's see. Reagan, Perot, Ron Paul. Ron Paul ran for president. He did congressman from Texas, the guy who voted no against anything that violated the Constitution. That was his thing. He voted against anything that violated the Constitution in any way. He voted no. Sometimes he was the only no vote in the House of Representatives in Washington. And he was the guy who created the Audit the Fed bill. He voted against the Patriot Act, against the war in Iraq, and he was one of the candidates in recent years that actually got people to start respecting, the Republicans again. There's actually a lot of good people in the Republican Party, like Ron Paul, and so a lot of people are now open to that. And you got the whole Tea Party, part of the Republican Party, and they're basically on this bandwagon on most issues. And it kind of just seems like the Democratic Party in America is the communist, totalitarian, status quo, multinational corporate interest party. You would ask me 15 years ago when I was much younger, I would have said, oh, the Republican Party is the corporate party. But I now see things completely differently. It's the other way around. There's a great movie about this called Hillary's America the Movie. And it was in theaters, and you can now get it on DVD. Hillary'sAmericaTheMovie.com, and it really exposes the Democratic Party and their history and how they were the KKK party and the Jim Crow party, and they lynched black people and white people for starting Republican Party, starting um, Republican Party meetings and creating a second party. See, in the South, the Democrats were the only party. They had a monopoly, and they protected the slave owners' interests after, the slaves were freed. And the Republican Party was the only second party, and it was the blacks that were founding the Republican Party, and there were some whites that were helping them, and the blacks were lynched alongside with the whites. The KKK went after political activists of the Republican Party. That's who they lynched. They didn't just go and lynch random black people. They lynched blacks and whites who were founding Republican Party satellite offices in those states. So what you need to do, if you don't know anything about this, how the Democratic Party was the pro-slavery party, they were the party that helped throw the measles blankets on the Native Americans even before then. The Democratic Party is evil. They are freaking evil. And there are some good people in the Republican Party. And, why am I going off on this rant about this? I mean, this is just, I feel this is an important election, and I don't want the banks to implode in a few years and be the end of civilization. I really don't. There's a lot of other things I'm concerned about, but I just want to let you know, okay, this is just the record shows, these are the candidates that are against what I'm talking about here. This whole insolvency of the banks, the problems that lead up to the financial crisis that we had before, and the worst ones that we'll have in the future if it doesn't stop. But Trump, Ron Paul, I even think, like Ted Cruz and a lot of those Tea Party people and Sarah Palin and a lot of those people are really probably on the for the most part against this as well. There's a lot of Republicans too that are against this. The Republicans are for balancing the budget and not runaway printing and borrowing, which is causing the problem. So, and I'm not saying you need to endorse any of these candidates or all of them. I'm just stating what the record shows, the people that are speaking out, against it and trying to save civilization. Okay, so look into that. But last note that I'll say about that is, if you go to YouTube and you type in, it's a great video I'd like you to watch. If you don't have time to get that movie or you don't want to buy the DVD, you can just type in Democratic Party KKK, and there's a great video. Democrats, horrible, racist past, and how they started KKK. Okay? If you type that in, that's the video. It's by Impeach Obama Now 2010 is the YouTube channel. Democrats, horrible, racist past, and how they started the KKK, and you can find that and a bunch of other videos if you just Google, do a YouTube search for Democratic Party KKK, and there's another video, KKK Democrats lynching, killing black and white, quote, radical Republicans. If you watch that, there's no way in hell that you will ever tell me, or anyone else for that matter, that Republicans are racist or anything of that nature, because the Democratic Party is got their history deep in racism. And I think there was a quote by, what's his name, Johnson, LBJ. There's a racist quote by LBJ saying something like, I'll have those N-word voting Democrat for the next 50 years. If you type that into Google. Yeah, type that into Google. Racist quote, LBJ, I'll have those N-word voting Democrat, and read about that. But the reason why a lot of African Americans are voting Democrat, it's all explained in here. They basically, they knew that segregation and civil rights was going to be pushed through in the 60s, and so the Democratic Party jumped on the bandwagon, and then they patted themselves on the back for passing civil rights legislation and being the pro-civil rights, the pro-black party, when really they're not, and their history shows that they're not. And this recording that, or this quote that LBJ said, just clearly shows. It's kind of like Hillary's emails, It clearly shows what they're saying behind the scenes and what they're doing just to gain votes. is completely different. They say one thing in public and one thing in private. So, yeah, anyways, didn't think I'd go on that much of a tangent, but hey, listen, it's on all of our minds right now. It's politics time, everything with this election. So how do I go without mentioning something about this? So anyways, governments cannot keep borrowing and printing forever. Someday their credit will run out. Historically, when people start to sense that things are going south economically in their country, they start moving their money towards the exits. It's precisely what's happening in places like Greece and even China, where depositors are pulling billions out of their banking system. Governments take steps to prevent this from happening by imposing capital controls. They restrict foreign exchange transactions, wire transfers, and even withdrawals, all to prevent you from taking money out of their precious banking system. Oh my god, it's just like hilarious. It's like this is like the most communist, socialist world government, like restriction regulations, like oh my god. Governments take steps to prevent this from happening by imposing capital controls. They restrict foreign exchange transactions, wire transfers, and even withdrawals, all to prevent you from taking your money out of their precious banking system. Okay, if they were really the best place for me to keep my money, why would they need to put so much restrictions on me transferring my money wherever the fuck that I want? I should be able to put my money wherever excuse my language, I should be able to put my money, and you should be able to put your money wherever the F you want, wherever you're treated best, wherever you get the most interest rate. If you're putting money in a savings or a CD account, whatever you get the most benefit back. And we are going to have, my friends, in the inner circle, we're going to have a whole report on the best banks in the best countries in the world that we know from personal experience. And I'm kind of like the low fish on the totem pole. I have mentors that are get some pretty pretty extensive life experience in this area. Okay, but we're gonna hash all that out to the people that actually have a bunch of money. And again, folks, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, or you only have like $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 to your name, saved up, this is really not for you just yet. But one thing that I just want to share with you, if you're not at this position to really be thinking about, where do I put my life savings overseas? It's wonderful for you to listen to this, because now you're kind of planning in advance. It's like getting your gears. It's like when you plan for what you're going to do with large amounts of money, and you already know exactly what you're going to do with it, where you're going to go with it, where you're going to deposit it, what you're going to buy with it. It's like you open up the portal. You open up a window to allow yourself to manifest that money, because you know exactly what to do with it. You don't have this like uncertainty or this fear about, well, what do I do when I have $100,000 or $1 million? Like, you already know what you're going. You already know the game plan. So it kind of like tugs you. It pulls you towards it when you can already see ahead, right? Like the first step is to get the money, and then the second step is to know where to put it. No, actually, from what I've learned from mentors and personal development training and life experiences, you look at what you're going to do with it after once you get it, and then that helps to like magnetically pull you towards that situation. It's just like in the movie The Secret. Okay, the documentary The Secret that came out in 2006, I believe. You must watch The Secret, and there's a ton of books and all the authors and people featured in that movie. You can go and read a book by every single one of them, and you'll really, in time, get what I'm talking about. But when you know what you're going to do with the money, what country you're going to set up your corporation in, what bank what exact bank and what country, and what are the forms that you need to open up a bank, and what do they need, what sort of identification, what sort of documents are they going to need. When you have all this stuff before you even have the money, you're going to manifest the money no problem, like much quicker, because you're magnetically pulled towards it. So it's fine for anybody to be listening to this recording, even though you might not be in a situation where you have large amounts of money right now. You'll gain the confidence to attract large amounts of money. Does that make sense? You'll gain the confidence to attract it, and this goes in any area of life, not just money, about manifesting love, a relationship, success at your new career, health, etc. It's just a wonderful concept. Okay. I'll read this one more time. Governments take steps to prevent this from happening by imposing capital controls. So if this is a new concept to you, go online and type in capital controls, and read about it. I could do more reading about it. Capital controls. And, that'll be something that we cover in the Inner Circle course. They restrict foreign exchange transactions. Wire transfers? Okay. And even withdrawals. All to prevent you from taking money out of their precious banking system. It's like they're not confident that you voluntarily want to keep the money there because they're actually giving you an advantage. Bottom line is, folks, they're a bunch of pussies. They have to put up all these barriers to you taking your money out because they're too scared, because they're a bunch of pussies. Sorry, folks, but moving a portion of your savings to a safer jurisdiction with minimal debt, can substantially reduce the risk. Okay. Moving much quicker into this. Other benefits of an offshore bank account. An offshore bank account is an insurance policy against a whole range of potentially devastating financial events. But that's not the only benefit of having some savings in a foreign bank. Take, for example, currency diversification. Some banks allow you to hold funds in multiple currencies so that you can diversify your currency exposure. This can be a good hedge against troubled currencies like the dollar or the euro, or it can enable you to profit from currency fluctuations. A single bank account in Hong Kong, for example, can enable you to hold your savings in a dozen different currencies all at once. Better interest rates. Often, you'll also find that interest rates abroad, we just talked about this before, are far better than domestic ones. Yes, it might be surprising that there are countries where the central bank has not set interest rates artificially low, and they are thus closer to market rates. Better service and perks. Banks in the West think they're innovative when they launch a Facebook fan page or a mobile app. There are banks in Asia that will let you hold gold bullion in your savings account or even buy into the next big IPO at an ATM machine. Why not see what of these things are being offered out there? It's like, my bank, Wells Fargo, where they just created 2 million fake customer accounts and had a gigantic $200 billion fine or something like that. They're not telling me about the next big IPO, or they're not, offering for me to hold gold bullion in my savings account. Yeah, because they're a bunch of POS, pieces of shit. So why are people doing business with them? I don't understand. These banks, Chase, Wells Fargo, what are people doing? It's like idiocy. It's like, I don't know. I don't understand. How to pick an offshore bank. In this section, I wanted to give you the tools to do your own due diligence and be able to confidently tell whether a bank is safe or not. This may seem overwhelming at first, but it is absolutely essential to do, and this is the exact process we go through for each and every bank that we recommend to our clients. What you need to do is find highly liquid, well-capitalized banks in jurisdictions that have low or zero net debt and are supported by well-capitalized central banks. It's like, so hold on a second. Wait a minute. Are you telling me that there are countries that you can open up a bank account legally anywhere in the world? Yes. That instead of there being no notes in the bank, whereas you can't just take out all your Federal Reserve notes. If everybody did that, there'd be none left. There wouldn't be enough to go around. You tell me that there's actually banks that are liquid and have the notes, are well capitalized, and the countries and the banks have no debt? Well, it's like, what? That's what you're thinking, right? You're like, what? Really? Yeah. It's not recommended to just get an offshore bank account for the sake of it being offshore. Go further than that if you're going to go through the trouble of opening up a bank account for the reasons so stated previously in this recording. Then we advise you to please seek real banks in reputable jurisdictions that do real business with real customers. Putting your money into just any offshore bank without considering the following factors could put you into a situation that is possibly worse than the bank account you have in your home country. Let's find out why. When you want to analyze a bank, you need to look at two things: the bank itself and the jurisdiction it is based in. Okay, so analyzing an offshore banking jurisdiction. To start with, you first need to be familiar with a particular jurisdiction. If the country is bankrupt, or the central bank is practically insolvent, then this makes the entire banking system there dangerous. So we prefer strong, financially sound jurisdictions with low or zero net debt and central banks with strong balance sheets. Each individual country's central bank will also have its own rules and regulations on reserve, liquidity, and capital adequacy ratios that banks operating in that jurisdiction must follow. And as with anything, some countries are more financially conservative than others. The key metrics to look out for are government net financial position, total assets minus liabilities, debt as a percentage of GDP, how indebted is the national government, how close are they to not being able to pay their obligations, because the day they can't pay their obligations is when they will turn to your savings to close their budget gap. It's like, wow, really? They can actually do that? They can actually legally do that? Yes, they actually can. Central bank solvency, net equity, total assets. Can the central bank, net equity divided by total assets, can the central bank withstand significant pressure? Will it really have the available tools to support the system in a crisis? It's also important to note that banks have to adhere to the regulations of the country in which they're operating. This means an American bank like Citibank operating a branch in Hong Kong will have to follow Hong Kong's rules and regulations. Although it may have weak fundamentals in the United States, the Hong Kong branch is legally a separate entity from the parent company in the United States, and as such maintains its own balance sheet and abides to the significantly more strict regulations of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. Beyond that, what you need to be looking at is the state of the jurisdiction's government and economy. Stability is key in this case, so qualitative traits to look out for include historical and current stability. Does an upheaval of the existing order seem like a possibility? How volatile is its economy? Obviously, right? You look at these, that's why being aware of political issues is kind of important when you're dealing with your money. That's why all people that have money are somewhat informed about what's going on in the world of politics, and they want to get more informed and know what's going on and be able to gain some wisdom and make better judgments, because they want to make sure that they keep their money in safe jurisdictions and their money is not at risk. Track record of respecting private property rights. Do they have a history of asset seizures and/or capital controls? Analyzing an offshore bank. Once you feel comfortable with the jurisdiction itself, the next step is to pick a particular bank. Here, doing your due diligence is absolutely essential. I start with analyzing an individual bank's balance sheet. If you cannot find it online, they're usually found among the regulatory disclosures the bank is required to provide. Ask one of the bank representatives on the phone or in person. If the bank refuses to provide you with its balance sheet, you do not want anything to do with them. My advice is to run. From here, you want to assess the bank's liquidity and solvency, the same key metrics by which you should already have assessed the jurisdiction's government, central bank, and banking system as a whole. Next is liquidity. Liquidity is key. A liquid bank is able to withstand a bank run and minor panics. A liquid bank is able to honor all withdrawal requests without delay because they have the available funds on hand. It's like, duh. Shouldn't they have like 100% on hand? A bank's liquidity is primarily determined by what proportion of the depositor's funds it holds in cash reserves and in liquid assets, meaning assets that they could just be converted or sold immediately, like other notes monetary instruments, whereas you can't necessarily sell a building, property, real estate, immediately. I wouldn't call that a liquid asset, or a long-term, where you don't get the payment back until 10 years from now, right? A long-term bond. It may not be a liquid, that's not a liquid asset. So a bank's liquidity is primarily determined by what proportion of depositors' funds it holds in cash reserves and in liquid assets. A healthy bank maintains adequate or even excess reserves with the central bank, and it can be instructive to look at an entire banking system's statutory requirement for reserves as well. Some banking systems, like in Lebanon, for example, impose very high reserve requirements on banks. Others are less conservative. In the United States, reserve requirements can be as low as 0. In Canada, there's no statutory reserve requirement at all. So basically, they don't have to have any government debt notes in there at all. This means that Canadian and U.S. banks essentially have no requirement to maintain a single penny of customer deposits on reserve. And that, ladies and gentlemen, requires that you have a lot of trust in your bank. Trust that if there's a financial shock and a run on the bank, that they will actually have the money to pay out to you. As a really simplified example, let's say that there are two banks, each with $100 in deposits. Bank A keeps just 40 cents in cash, 50 cents in bonds, $99.10 in loans, while Bank B keeps $5 in cash, $5 in bonds, and $90 in loans. The key here is that not all assets and loans are equals. Cash by default is the most liquid asset. Generally speaking, loans, mortgages, car loans, etc., are much less liquid than, say, 28-day government bonds. It will take a bank about half a second to liquidate government bonds. Loans, on the other hand, need to be recalled or collateralized in complicated transactions. This is not liquid, especially if everyone else is trying to sell at the same time. So a liquid bank has a fairly low loan to deposit ratio. The fewer loans outstanding relative to the total deposits, the more liquid a bank tends to be, and the more able they are to withstand a crisis. So this talks about even loans, government bonds, 28 days, but loans are even longer to cash out on. So that's even, so you want to look at banks that don't give that many loans, but invest in more shorter-term assets. With that in mind, which of these banks do you think would be better able to withstand a major financial shock and have cash to pay out to the depositors lining up at the doors? And then they've got a couple of examples. Obviously, Bank B, which has both more in cash reserves and in highly liquid assets. So while a mere whisper of a bank run could lead to withdrawal controls or bankruptcy for Bank A, Bank B could withstand significantly more pressure. In case you're wondering why these examples are down to the penny, it's because they're based off of banks' real financial statements. Bank A is that of JP Morgan, while Bank B is one of the institutions we have handpicked for our clients. Interesting. JP Morgan has 1.67% of its cash for its depositors. Very, very, very interesting. Solvency, capitalization. Solvency describes by how much a bank's assets can drop in market value before its liabilities are greater than its assets, and thus the bank becomes insolvent. A healthy bank holds strong capital reserves on its balance sheet so that if some of its assets go bad and become unrecoverable, the bank still has enough funds to cover its depositors and creditors. I look at how much equity, assets minus liabilities, a bank has as a percentage of total assets. Continuing from our previous example, Bank A and Bank B each have $100 in total assets, cash, bonds, loans, etc. Bank A, JP Morgan, has $90 in liabilities, customer deposits, debt, etc. So its net equity is just $10 or 10% of its assets. Viewed alone, this would generally be an acceptable level of solvency, but when a bank is as illiquid as this one, solvency must be much higher to compensate. In comparison, Bank B has just $80 in liabilities, so its net equity is $20 or 20% of assets. If the market value of Bank A's assets falls by 10%, its liabilities are then greater than its assets and it would be insolvent and out of business. Bank B, on the other hand, has enough capital to withstand a 20% drop in its asset valuations. This, together with its high level of liquidity, puts this bank in a very strong position. These two factors together give us a very strong idea of a bank's margin of safety. And again, these are real examples. It's scary to think of how many people hold the whole of their life savings in banks with liquidity levels as shockingly low as that of JP Morgan here, completely ignorant of the risk. Lending and investment behavior. Beyond just the numbers are the institution's principles. A healthy bank doesn't engage in excessive risky lending or investment behavior. Thus, the likelihood its assets will be impaired is low in the first place. As a borrower, you want a bank that gives out loans with low interest rates, with easy credit requirements and flexible terms. Right? If you want to get a loan from a bank as a borrower, you want low interest rates, no matter what your credit is. If it's moderate, doesn't have to be great, you want to be able to, get approved. And you want some flexible terms, right? That's if you're trying to get a loan from a bank. But if you're trying to deposit money in a bank and have your money be safe and protected as a depositor, you want to look at exactly the opposite of that, since it is your money that you're lending out and gambling with to borrowers. You want a conservative, risk-averse bank that will act as a prudent custodian of your savings. Just as not all assets are the same, not all loans are the same either. Some banks are very cautious to whom they give loans, taking care to see that they are likely and able to repay them. You can examine the bank's financial statements to see that it doesn't invest too much in assets that are deemed to have a heavy risk weighting. A community bank that specializes in making short-term secured mortgage loans to doctors and dentists, for example, will likely be preferable to one that uses depositors' money to invest in penny stocks. To assess this, I suggest that you take a good look at the bank's business model. A good indicator of any bank's loan practices is also its current and historical non-performing loan ratio, NPL ratio. Responsible banks do not make loans to subprime borrowers
who by definition are highly unlikely to make good on their loans. Thus, you should be very wary of banking in any country with, quote, affordable housing legislation, which encourages mortgages to be given to people who cannot afford them. This interferes with sound banking practices and makes the system far riskier.
5 banking jurisdictions compared. United States. Government net position, poor. The federal government's net position is minus 17 trillion, which is far in excess of US GDP. This means that the U.S. government lacks the financial wherewithal to credibly bail out its banking system or support its depositors. U.S. Federal Reserve capital ratio, poor. The Fed already had razor-thin capitalization to begin with, but as of 2016, that was cut in half. Now at just 0.88% capitalization. They have next to nothing in reserves as a buffer in case a financial crisis strikes. Bank liquidity, poor. As an example, let's look at JP Morgan, which as of the end of 2015 has about 20.5 billion in cash equivalents to support 1.279 trillion in customer deposits. That's a liquidity ratio of just 1.6%. Not only is that pitifully small, but it's also down from 2.05% just a year ago. And JP Morgan is supposed to be considered a healthy bank. Bank solvency, adequate. Again, JP Morgan is currently posting total capital of 248 billion, or roughly 10.53% of its total assets of 2.35 trillion. Ordinarily, this would be an acceptable margin of safety, but when a bank has very little liquidity, I want to see a much higher margin of safety. Think about it like this. If just 1.6% of JP Morgan's customers want to withdraw their funds, then JP Morgan is out of money. Now, ordinarily, this wouldn't happen. But in serious financial shocks, bank runs do occur, so it would seem likely that they would far surpass the 1.6% threshold. Now, if that happens, JP Morgan would have to sell some of its assets in order to raise cash. The problem with this is that in a financial shock, the sale of assets does not happen in an orderly way. Asset sales in a financial shock are more like fire sales. Asset values are plummeting. You don't get reasonable market value. You get distressed prices. So, with a margin of safety of just 10.53%, it's possible JP Morgan's assets could deteriorate far beyond that level in a financial shock. The bottom line, if they don't have enough cash to meet basic liquidity needs, and if they need to liquidate assets and raise cash, they don't have a significant margin of safety to ensure solvency in a fire sale. All of these factors, low bank solvency, low bank liquidity, low central bank solvency, government insolvency, suggest that the U.S. is not an appropriate place in which to hold the majority of your savings. Number 2, United Kingdom. Government net position, poor. Though nowhere near the U.S.'s levels of indebtedness, the U.K. government is seriously deep in the hole with 1851.8 billion pounds in net liabilities. When a government's finances are strained, not only does this prevent it from being a backstop for the financial sector, but it also can lead to confiscation measures if pushed too far. So that's 1.85 trillion British pounds in debt. The Bank of England solvency, poor. Bank of England, the UK's central banking institution, has capital and reserves of just 3.4 billion to back 408.5 billion in assets. At just 0.83%, this is even worse than the Federal Reserve's own perilously low level of capitalization. Bank liquidity adequate. Taking a look at the financial statements of Barclays, one of the UK's biggest banks, you'll find a liquidity level of roughly 9.28%. This is not necessarily cause for concern. Wow, 9.28%, much higher than the 1.67 of JP Morgan. Not necessarily cause for concern at 9.28%, but I typically prefer at least double-digit levels of liquidity before I put my money anywhere. Bank solvency, poor. What is cause for concern, however, is Barclays' level of solvency at just 4.86%. This is very low and puts the institution in a very precarious position. If the stock market were to tank and asset prices were to fall, it wouldn't take much to render the bank insolvent. Wow. All right, Hong Kong, country number 3. Hong Kong receives top marks from me as one of the best places in the world to bank. The central bank is one of the best capitalized in the world, and the banking system is extremely liquid. Over the past few years, it has become increasingly difficult to open a bank account in Hong Kong as a foreigner, but it is still possible. Government net position, excellent. Hong Kong's cumulative debt load is negligible at 2% of gross domestic product. Wow. And despite having some of the lowest tax rates in the world, the Hong Kong government almost always runs a budget surplus. Central bank solvency, excellent. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority is one of the highest capitalized central banks in the world. As of quarter 4 of 2005, its capital ratio is 18.9% of its assets. That's literally 21 times more than that of the Federal Reserve. Banking system liquidity, good. HSBC Hong Kong's most recent annual reports show cash equivalents equal to 10.22% of customer deposits. This is a good ratio. Banking system solvency, adequate. HSBC Hong Kong's net equity is equal to 8.77% of total assets. HSBC also has a conservative loan-to-deposit ratio which stands at 62%. Given the overall health of the Hong Kong banking system, this is a more than reasonable figure. Norway always receives top marks from me given how liquid the banking system is and how healthy the government's financial position is. The Norwegian Central Bank is the most well capitalized in the world, meaning that the Norwegian krone is the cockroach of fiat currencies. It will be able to withstand even a nuclear shock to the financial system. Government net position, excellent. Norway is so wealthy that its net financial position is well over 100% of GDP. Not only does this mean that they have no net debt, but they've built up a significant fund from oil revenue and tucked it away to cover future liabilities. All this is tucked away in a rainy day fund. Gee, who has that? Central bank solvency, excellent. And again, the Norwegian Central Bank is prodigiously capitalized. Its March 2014 balance sheet showed net equity equal to 31.6%. Compare this to the Federal Reserve's, the U.S. Federal Reserve's, which is at just 0.88%. It's an astounding difference. Banking system liquidity, excellent. We were a bit troubled by DNB Norway's latest financial statement for quarter 3 of 2015, showing that their ratio of cash and cash equivalents to customer deposits were an impressive 19.9%. Banking system solvency, adequate. DNB Norway's net equity has risen significantly since the last year to 8.88% of total assets. Ultimately, DNB is partly owned by the cash-rich Norwegian government, so the likelihood of a failure is minimal. Not to mention, DNB runs a very conservative portfolio with zero exposure to any toxic U.S. or European assets. Singapore. Like Hong Kong, Singapore has an incredibly well-developed financial system that has become one of the most important in the world. And I am frequently discussing the benefits of banking in the city-state. Government net position, excellent. Like Norway, Singapore has no net debt. Central bank solvency, adequate. The Monetary Authority of Singapore has lost billions over the years trying to keep its currency artificially depressed against the US dollar. It's not working. Net central bank capital was at 10.5% of total assets at the end of 2014. Banking system liquidity, excellent. In the 2014 financial statements, DBS in Singapore recently posted cash equivalents equal to roughly 13.08% of total customer deposits. Banking system solvency, good. Not excellent, but good. DBS's net equity constitutes 10.31% of its total assets. Together with the bank's high level of liquidity level, this is a solid figure. All right, so those are 5, just an introduction of comparing the US and the UK, which are horrible, versus Hong Kong, Norway, and Singapore. Obviously, there's some, as it said, difficulty with foreigners getting bank accounts in Hong Kong, which is why there are ways that you can get residency in these countries by, visiting them and staying there for 3 or 6 months or different things like this. I'm going to come out with a whole guide of strategies, and one part of the strategy will be how to open up a bank, what are the best places and where to open up a bank account without leaving. You can do it through the telephone and through email. And then there's other strategies that require traveling. But you definitely want to look at these things as an option, especially if you can do it from the comfort of your home without having to leave. And then if you have a better option that requires you to go there in person, at some point making a trip there and opening an account there if that's what's needed, or visiting and traveling and staying there for a while. There's always ways that you could upgrade and go to the more perfect place. However, just by going anywhere other than the US or the UK, there are many other places, and it's not the topic of this conversation. This presentation was meant to give you an introduction, just a start of your research. Okay, so by no means am I saying that, especially to start off with, you have to open up a bank account in Hong Kong and that's the best place for you, or Norway or Singapore, but those are 3 options you may want to look into. We're going to be doing more about this in the inner circle for people that actually have life savings or stockpile of money that they want to secure into a different more secure banking system. A lot of you don't have to worry about any of this right now, but at least that when you do get a lot of money, you can come to us and you can get our recommendations. You can ask us what we do, you can ask us what we recommend, and you can do your own diligence, and we can guide you or direct you to certain resources or certain people that can get these things set up for you or walk you through. I will be putting together certain guides, certain cliff notes and certain guidelines for the Inner Circle members. So anyways, this is Tyler signing off. Glad you had a chance to make it through this entire audio, and I hope you learned a lot and it got your brain, the gears in your brain working. Okay, see you on the next week's recording. It is completely legal and reasonable, even if you are a U.S. citizen or resident, to have an offshore bank account. And there's nothing to be scared or worried about as long as you report it properly to the IRS if you are a U.S. citizen or resident. In order to do this, you need to make sure that all your financial activity is conducted legally and openly. And it is essential that every year you fill out the following forms and include them with your taxes by April 15th. FBAR form, otherwise known as FinCEN 114. FinCEN 114. If the total amount held in those accounts abroad exceeds $10,000. Secondly, there's a Form 1040 Schedule B. It's a 1-page form, and there's a 1 page of instructions. It's a relatively simple form. And thirdly, Form 8938, which is a more complicated form. It's 3 pages. It's got 6 parts to it. This form is a little more detailed. Again, if you're doing this for the first time, I would not, unless you have been trained in how to properly fill out these forms. I would not do them the first time. I would make sure that you take a course that teaches you how to fill them out. You get with someone who's done it before. You get with someone who's a professional. You get with someone who deals with clients that they fill these forms out for their clients, or they're a accountant that deals with international reporting requirements. Your life is on the line here, right? This is not a joke. So do not just, I'm just going to go fill out the forms the best of my, you need to get expert training or hire an expert sometimes when you're dealing with filling out certain financial forms and tax forms and things like that. Even the richest people in the world, Bill Gates, Donald Trump, whatever, don't think to fill a lot of these forms out themselves. They have experts whose area of expertise and experience and knowledge is in interpreting, reading, understanding, and filling out the forms properly. So I'm putting out the form. I thought about not putting out the forms on this recording because there are some people on my list that just jump and do things so early without even having any years of experience at it. But I'll just put this disclaimer in here. You take full responsibility if you jump and fill out the forms and do something before you, fully, get expert advice on them, and you miss something or do something wrong. I mean, you do so at your own peril. So I would highly recommend that you get with someone who knows what they're doing the first couple times around, or to just constantly hire an accountant. So, which a lot of people do. But when you're dealing with international offshore reporting requirements, make sure you deal with someone who specializes in that particular area of expertise.